What happens when a man helps a starving alien? The price could be his life. Imagine this: you're living a quiet, lonely life in the cold, distant corners of space. And then out of nowhere you find yourself face to face with an alien woman, not just any alien, but one who's starving, broken, and desperate for survival. But as the night goes on, you begin to realize something: you've just invited a being from another world into your life. What would you do? Would you help her, or turn her away? But here's the twist: this isn't just a simple act of kindness. This alien, she's not like anything you've ever known. And the consequences of saving her life might change everything you thought you knew about love, sacrifice, and survival in the universe. In that moment, when Derrick took that first step toward Elara, he had no idea that he was about to become part of something far bigger than himself. He wasn't just saving a stranger. He was saving his future, and maybe, just maybe, discovering the true meaning of love beyond the stars. But the real question is this: what happens when the person you save turns out to be the one who saves you from a life you never knew you were stuck in? You're about to find out. Keep watching, because this story, it'll make you question everything you thought you knew about love and destiny. Derrick stepped out onto the cold, metal floors of the station, his boots echoing through the empty corridors. Argus 9 had become a ghost town. Once, it had been alive with the hum of machinery and the chatter of workers. Now, silence. His only companion was the hum of failing generators. He adjusted his jacket, pulling the collar higher, trying to ignore the cold that gnawed at him from all sides. The station's dim lights flickered overhead. The artificial sun that was supposed to keep them alive now seemed more like a mockery. It had been days since he'd last spoken to anyone. Days since he'd seen another human face. And then, he found it. The crate. It was different from the others. Old. Scuffed. Burned, even. The latch was patched with rough, uneven welding. It didn't match the standard. His heart skipped a beat. Something wasn't right. He crouched, eyes narrowing. The faint outline of a symbol, barely visible under the scorched surface, caught his attention. A triangle. The insignia of a corporation he didn't recognize. His fingers brushed the latch. He paused. This wasn't part of the manifest. A breath. Soft. Fragile. His hand went to his sidearm, but he didn't draw. Not yet. The silence stretched on. Then, there it was again. Another breath. Wet, real, just, there. He pressed his thumb to the latch panel. Override. The crate hissed open, a cloud of mist escaping, curling around his boots. Derrick's eyes darted to the inside. Darkness. A smell faintly burnt. Ozone. Fear. He took a step back, tension coiling in his chest. Something was in there. A figure. Small. Vulnerable. She barely moved at first, her skin a strange shade of emerald green, shimmering slightly in the low light. Her body was thin. Gaunt, even. She blinked slowly. Her eyes teal, wide with an animal's fear, locked with his. She didn't speak. Didn't move. Not yet. He felt the tension in his chest tighten. Who the hell locks a living being in a crate? He stepped closer, cautiously. The faintest tremor passed through her. Hey. His voice was rough, almost a whisper. Are you okay? Her lips parted, but no words came. She looked lost. As if she didn't know how to respond. A thin, cracked hand reached out slowly, trembling. He didn't hesitate. He reached into his pack and pulled out a sealed protein bar. No one could survive like this, not without help. He set it down in front of her, then took a step back, eyes never leaving hers. Minutes passed. She stared at the food. Her gaze fixed, intent, but she didn't move. Not yet. Then, with a tremor in her fingers, she reached for it. Her fingers fumbled with the wrapper. She didn't know how to open it. No. She was too weak. She bit into the edge, desperate. Too fast. She choked, gasped, then froze, her body stiffening, as if waiting for punishment. Derrick's breath hitched. He stepped forward, slowly. His hands, steady, placed a canteen beside her. Go ahead. Drink. No one's stopping you. She flinched at the sound of his voice but took the canteen. She drank like it might disappear, like it wasn't real. She lowered the canteen when she finished, shoulders sagging, but not with relief. No. It was resignation. Like her body finally allowed her the weakness she had been holding back. Her eyes met his. The way she watched him, it wasn't fear anymore. There was something else. A sense of recognition. He knelt, carefully. You're safe now. She didn't speak. But she didn't run. She didn't look away either. The air in the room was thick with tension, but something about it felt familiar. He rose to his feet, the moment slipping between them like water through fingers. Come on, he said, quietly. You can't stay in there. She didn't respond. Didn't move. But when he turned to leave, he felt it. The slight sound of footsteps behind him. Soft. Tentative. He glanced back. She was there. Just inside the doorway, standing barefoot, clutching the empty canteen to her chest. Her eyes were still cautious, unsure, but she was there. She followed him as he walked to the corridor. Her steps light, almost soundless, her presence as fragile as the air around them. Derrick didn't know who she was. He didn't know where she came from. But something inside him stirred, something he hadn't felt in years. A connection. The corridor stretched on, silent. The station seemed to groan under the weight of years of neglect, but in that moment, it wasn't just another lifeless place. It felt like something more. Something had just shifted. Elara didn't speak. She simply followed Derrick, her footsteps light against the cold metal floors. Her eyes never left him, flickering between caution and curiosity. She was unsure, but there was something in her gaze. Something that made him feel like he wasn't completely alone anymore. They walked for what felt like an eternity through the narrow hallways of the station. The low hum of the failing generators echoed around them, a constant reminder of how long this place had been forgotten. Derrick could feel the weight of her presence, but he didn't know how to bridge the silence between them. She had to know something about herself. Something that could explain why she was here, in the middle of nowhere, locked away like a forgotten cargo. But Elara remained silent. Finally, they reached one of the empty rooms. It was nothing more than a tiny, dimly lit space with a single cot in the corner. Derrick placed his bag down on the floor and turned to her. Here, he said. You can rest. She didn't move at first. There was a hesitation, like she was still unsure of where she was, what this meant. Her hands gripped the empty canteen tightly, like it was the only thing grounding her. Derrick didn't know what else to say. He rubbed his face, exhaustion creeping in. He hadn't slept properly in days, but the thought of leaving her alone, it didn't sit right with him. "You can sleep here. Just rest." His voice was softer than he intended, tinged with something he couldn't quite place. Maybe it was pity. Maybe it was something else. Elara's eyes flickered to the cot, then back to him. She didn't trust him. Derrick could see that. But what else did she have? What choice did she have? She was trapped in a place she didn't know, with no one but a stranger who couldn't offer her any answers. Still, she stepped forward, slowly, cautiously, as if testing the ground beneath her feet. Derrick watched her, unsure of what to do next. His eyes followed her every movement, waiting for some kind of response. Elara paused by the cot, her gaze wandering over the dimly lit room. It was a sad, empty place, and for a brief moment, Derrick saw something flicker in her eyes, a distant sadness. She wasn't just scared. She was lost. Without a word, she sat down on the cot, the silence between them stretching into something almost tangible. Derrick stood there, unsure of what to do. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound in the room was the faint hum of the station, the quiet rhythm of breathing. The weight of the moment pressed in on them. Derrick's mind raced, his thoughts a jumble. Who was she? Where had she come from? What had happened to her? Then, without warning, Elara spoke. Why are you helping me?" Her voice was soft, hesitant, but there was a rawness to it. A vulnerability that Derrick hadn't expected. He stared at her, unsure how to answer. What could he say? The truth? That he had no idea why he was helping her? That he had no real reason to, except that something inside him refused to let her be abandoned. "I don't know," he said, the honesty surprising even himself. "Maybe because, you're not alone anymore." He swallowed, stepping closer, but not too close. She was still a stranger. Still an unknown. Her eyes softened, just for a moment, before the walls went back up. She looked away, her fingers gripping the edge of the cot. There was something delicate about her, something fragile. Derrick didn't understand it, but he could feel it, like an invisible thread pulling them together, despite the silence between them. She shifted slightly, and the sound of her movement broke the tension. Derrick held his breath as she turned her gaze back to him, her eyes filled with that same uncertainty. There was something else there too, something deeper. A question. "Who are you?" Elara asked, her voice still soft but a little more firm now, like she was trying to push past the walls she'd built. "What are you doing here?" Derrick hesitated, the question hitting harder than he expected. What was he doing here? Was he just existing? Was he merely surviving? "Just trying to get by," he said finally, his words slow, measured. "Been here too long. Just keeping things running. Alone." He looked away, unsure why the truth felt harder to say than it should. Elara didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke volumes. It was then that he realized he wasn't just protecting her. No, it was more than that. He needed her to be okay. He needed her to survive, and he didn't know why. But he couldn't walk away from her, not like this. For the first time in a long time, Derrick felt the weight of responsibility. There was no going back. The hours passed, and the silence between them grew heavier. Derrick sat across from Elara, his back against the cold metal wall, his eyes never straying too far from her. Her breathing was slow now, more relaxed, but there was still that tension in her posture, as if the world outside this small room could collapse at any moment. And it did. The emergency alarms blared to life, breaking the stillness. Derrick's body tensed instantly. He rose, his hand already reaching for the blaster at his hip. The sound echoed down the narrow corridors, sharp and piercing, shaking the dust from the walls. A deep, guttural voice crackled through the intercom system. Unauthorized entry detected in docking bay C. All personnel, report to your stations. Code red. Repeat, code red. Derrick's mind raced. Who the hell was coming? And why? There had been no ships scheduled for days. No one had docked here since the last salvage operation. He turned to Elara. Her eyes were wide, her body rigid as she stood, hands shaking. Stay here, he ordered, but the words felt weak, even to him. What was he thinking? Stay here? She was no prisoner. She wasn't going to just sit and wait. She wasn't that kind of person. Before he could move, she spoke. I'm coming with you. Her voice was quiet but firm. There was no fear in it, only a strange resolve. It was as if she knew something Derrick didn't. He hesitated, looking at her, and for a second, the world outside stopped moving. He saw it, her eyes, glowing faintly in the dim light, filled with something he couldn't name. It wasn't fear. It wasn't hesitation. It was determination. All right, he said, his voice low. There was no time to argue. They moved quickly through the corridors, Derrick leading the way. The station felt different now, alive, almost as if it were holding its breath along with them. The closer they got to docking bay C, the more the air seemed to vibrate with the weight of impending danger. They reached the bay door, and Derrick didn't hesitate. His hand moved to the control panel. He slammed his fist against the metal, and the door slid open with a loud screech. What they saw wasn't what he expected. A small ship, barely a freighter, sat just outside the docking area. It was dark, almost blending into the shadows, but the flicker of lights inside told him it wasn't a ghost ship. And the figures standing near the entrance were not human. Derrick's grip tightened around his weapon. Elara stood beside him, her eyes scanning the scene. She wasn't afraid, not like Derrick. There was a calmness to her, an almost unnatural stillness in the way she held herself. He could feel it. She was different. More than just the way she looked. She knew what was coming. The figures turned toward them. The air seemed to crackle with tension. Derrick's mind raced through options, none of them good. Who are they? He whispered, though he knew she couldn't answer. Elara took a slow step forward, her gaze locked on one of the figures. Her voice was low, almost a murmur. They're not here for you, she said. Derrick's heart skipped a beat. What did she mean? Not here for him? Before he could ask more, one of the figures, tall, angular, with a dark helmet that obscured their face, raised a hand. Move aside, the voice came, cold and metallic. We are here for the cargo. Step away. Derrick's eyes narrowed. Cargo? What the hell was he talking about? Elara's voice was almost a growl. You don't know what you're dealing with, she said, the words thick with authority. Derrick had never heard her sound like that before. The figure didn't move. Instead, he stepped closer, raising a weapon, though it wasn't aimed at Derrick, not yet. It was aimed at Elara. Move, he said again, this time with a flicker of impatience. Derrick stepped in front of her without thinking. The sudden movement startled the figure, and for a split second, Derrick saw something fear in the soldier's eyes. But Elara was already moving. Her hand shot out, faster than Derrick could follow, and in one swift motion, she knocked the soldier's weapon aside. Her strength was unreal. She wasn't just fast. She was efficient. Before the soldier could recover, Elara took another step forward, her hand now glowing faintly with an energy that Derrick could barely comprehend. She raised it, and the soldier's weapon was ripped from his grasp, thrown across the room, like a toy in the wind. The other soldiers moved, drawing their own weapons, but Derrick was faster. He fired first, catching one of them off guard. The figure dropped to the floor with a heavy thud. The remaining soldier hesitated. Derrick had no time for hesitation. He charged. A violent crash rang through the bay as he collided with the soldier, sending them both tumbling to the ground. The clang of metal against metal echoed in the chaos, and for a brief moment, it felt like the station itself was holding its breath. Then, Derrick's hand found the soldier's neck, and he squeezed tight. The soldier didn't fight back. He simply stopped. Derrick stood, panting, his chest heaving. He looked over at Elara. Her face was expressionless, but her eyes, those bright, unnatural eyes, glowed with something dark. She didn't need to say anything. Derrick knew what it meant. The battle wasn't over. Not yet. The battle ended just as quickly as it had started. The last soldier dropped to the ground, his body unmoving, and silence fell over the bay like a heavy curtain. The flashing emergency lights painted everything in an eerie red hue, adding to the tension that hung thick in the air. Derrick's breath was still ragged, his hand gripping his weapon as if it might slip from his fingers. His eyes flicked over to Elara, who stood beside him, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. But there was no sign of fear in her, only a quiet, focused intensity. Elara looked at the fallen soldiers, then at Derrick. Her eyes were deep, unreadable, and for a brief moment, he caught a glimpse of something that sent a shiver down his spine. She wasn't just strong. She was controlled, calculated. But she was still human, in a way he hadn't expected. Without a word, she reached out, taking a step toward him. Her hand brushed against his, just for a split second, and in that fleeting moment, it was as if the whole world paused. Derrick's pulse quickened. His heart thudded against his chest in a way he hadn't felt in years. He looked at her, meeting her gaze for the first time since the fight began. Her eyes weren't just filled with the fierce determination he had seen earlier. They were softer now. There was something vulnerable about them, something that spoke to the way she was torn between trusting him and holding on to whatever was left of her past. She didn't pull away. Her fingers lingered against his, a silent invitation to stay. But it wasn't just about the touch. It was about what it meant. Her breath was still warm against his skin, and his own breath caught. Derrick didn't move. Not yet. He didn't know what this was, what he was feeling. But the connection was undeniable. The air between them had shifted, charged with something deeper than survival. For a moment, they both stood there in the middle of the room, the silence pressing down on them like the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. Derrick swallowed, breaking the stillness. "We need to keep moving." Elara nodded slowly, but she didn't step away. Instead, she turned her hand, letting her fingers trace lightly across his palm before pulling back. The contact was subtle, fleeting, but it was enough. It sent a jolt of heat rushing through him, and for the first time in a long while, he felt something other than the cold isolation of the station. They walked in silence for a while, side by side, down the dark corridors. The hum of the generators was the only sound, the only reminder of the dying station around them. But Derrick couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. The way Elara had touched him. The way she had looked at him. He had seen her fight. He had seen her strength. But now, for the first time, he saw her as something more than just a survivor. He saw her as someone who was real, someone who had lived through things he couldn't even begin to understand. And somehow, that made him feel less alone. As they reached the control room, Elara stopped. She turned to him, her face illuminated by the soft, flickering lights of the console. There was a weight in her eyes, something that made Derrick's heart skip. "Derrick," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "what happens now?" The question hung in the air like a heavy fog. What did happen now? After everything they had just been through? Was it even possible to walk away from this? To pretend that the connection they shared wasn't real? He didn't know the answer. All he knew was that he couldn't just walk away. Not from her. Not from whatever this was between them. "I don't know," he said quietly, stepping closer, his hand brushing against hers again. The touch was almost tentative, like they were both afraid of what it meant. But it was enough to send a spark of electricity through him. She didn't pull away. Instead, she took another step toward him, and their faces were so close now that he could feel the heat of her breath. And in that moment, it wasn't about the mission. It wasn't about the danger lurking outside. It was just about the two of them, standing there, connected in a way neither of them could explain. Derrick could feel the tension between them building. His pulse was erratic, his thoughts scattered. He was so close to her now, so close he could almost taste the air around them. His hand, still resting near hers, itched to move. To close the distance. Before he could make a decision, Elara's eyes flickered down to his lips, and he felt the sudden shift in the air. It was as if everything between them, everything unsaid, was finally coming to the surface. She leaned in, just slightly, and Derrick's breath caught in his throat. Then, her voice broke the spell, soft and steady. "I trust you," she whispered, her words sending a wave of heat through him. Something inside him snapped. He didn't think. He didn't question. He simply moved, closing the distance between them. His lips met hers, gently at first, as if testing the waters, unsure of what it would mean. But when she didn't pull away, he deepened the kiss, and everything else faded away. For the first time in a long time, Derrick felt like he was truly alive. Like, maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as alone as he thought. The kiss was slow, filled with hesitation, but also with something stronger: desire, longing, trust. When they finally pulled apart, the world around them still felt suspended in time. Derrick looked at Elara, her eyes still glowing in the dim light, and he knew one thing for sure: this wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about something else. Something worth fighting for. The air in the control room felt heavier now. The kiss between Derrick and Elara had left a mark, not just physically, but emotionally. They stood there, inches apart, still feeling the echo of that moment between them. Derrick's hand lingered in the air, as if unsure whether to pull back or keep reaching for her. But there was no time for hesitation. The station was still alive with the hum of its failing systems. Outside the walls, the danger had not passed. If anything, it was just beginning. Derrick turned to the console, his mind refocusing on the task at hand. He typed quickly, pulling up the security feed. The docking bay was still empty, save for the debris and the faint outline of the ship that had just landed. But there was something else, a flash of movement in the corner of the camera. He stiffened. "Elara," he said, his voice low. "Get back. Stay behind me." But Elara didn't move. She was already closer to the screen, her eyes scanning the data. The strange calmness that seemed to follow her was unnerving. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't even concerned. "You should listen," Derrick said again, turning to face her. But Elara didn't respond. Instead, she reached out, her fingers grazing the console. "Wait," she whispered, almost to herself. For a moment, the room was silent, except for the quiet hum of the console. Derrick's heartbeat drummed in his ears, a dull reminder of the danger that lingered just beyond the walls. But Elara's gaze had shifted, her eyes locked on the screen. There was something there, something she could see that he couldn't. And then it hit him. A sharp, sudden pulse of energy. It wasn't the station's failing systems. It was something else. Something alive. "Move!" Derrick shouted, but it was too late. The control panel flared to life, lights flashing bright. A rush of static filled the room as the console began to glitch, flickering in and out. The noise was deafening, but Elara stood unmoving, her eyes closed, her hands raised in front of her. Derrick watched as her skin began to glow faintly. He couldn't believe it. It was her, the power was coming from her. She wasn't just another survivor. She wasn't just a stowaway. Elara had something that none of them had. Her hands clenched, and the station's systems surged, the lights stabilizing for a brief moment before plunging back into darkness. A low hum filled the air as if the very walls of the station were responding to her. Derrick took a step forward, his pulse racing. "Elara, what is this?" he demanded, his voice sharp with disbelief. "What are you doing?" Her eyes fluttered open, glowing with a vibrant teal light, her expression calm but distant. "It's not about what I'm doing," she said softly, her voice carrying an eerie certainty. "It's what I am." Derrick's stomach tightened. He felt a cold shiver run down his spine. "What do you mean?" he asked, but he already feared the answer. Elara stepped forward, her movement slow but graceful. She reached out, her hand brushing Derrick's arm. The warmth of her touch sent a jolt through him, but it wasn't just physical, it was something deeper, something he couldn't explain. It was as if he could feel her power, flowing through him. "I am the key," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was made to control this power. The station, the systems, everything." Derrick's mind spun. "What are you talking about?" Her gaze darkened. "I am the one they created. The one they locked away. But now I'm free. And with that freedom comes everything they tried to keep from me." The room felt suffocating. Derrick stepped back, his thoughts whirling. "You're telling me you can control this entire station?" He struggled to comprehend it. "All the systems, the power." Elara nodded, but there was something unsettling in her calmness. "More than that. I can control the energy. I can bend it, channel it, harness it." The power around them shifted, like an invisible current flowing through the walls, the floor, the very air itself. Derrick could feel it now, the weight of her words. She wasn't just a survivor. She was something else entirely. The silence stretched between them, thick with the weight of her revelation. Derrick didn't know whether to feel awe, fear, or something else entirely. Elara's voice broke through his thoughts. "Do you want to know why I was locked away?" She paused, her eyes meeting his. "Because I'm not just a weapon. I'm the only chance the station has at surviving." Derrick took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. The intensity of her gaze sent a ripple through him. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about power. Trust. Control. He opened his mouth to speak, but the sound of footsteps interrupted them. Someone was coming. They both turned toward the door. The silence was broken. The danger wasn't over yet. The footsteps grew louder, echoing in the cold metal halls of the station. Derrick's heart skipped a beat as the sound approached. His hand instinctively went to the sidearm at his hip, but Elara's presence beside him grounded him. She was still glowing faintly, her energy pulsing through the air around them. He didn't know what it was, if it was fear, if it was power, but something told him this was the moment where everything changed. Elara stood motionless, her eyes narrowing, focused on the door. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The same energy that had lit up her hands earlier now shimmered faintly in the air between them. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing two figures. One was a familiar face, a man in a dark uniform with a scar running down his cheek. Kian. The other was a stranger, clad in a suit that shimmered like liquid metal. He was tall, his face hidden behind a dark visor. But there was something cold about him, something that made Derrick's skin crawl. Kian's eyes flicked to Elara, then to Derrick. His expression was unreadable, but his body language was tense. He had come for a reason. Derrick knew it. "Elara," Kian's voice was low, almost a growl. "They're here." Derrick's breath caught. He hadn't expected Kian to show up, not like this. Not in the middle of everything that had happened. But something in the way Kian looked at Elara made it clear this wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about power. And secrets. The man in the shiny suit stepped forward, his movements calculated and precise. He didn't look at Derrick. Instead, his gaze was fixed on Elara. "You know who we are," the man said, his voice metallic, like he was speaking through a filter. "We've been searching for you." Elara's eyes narrowed, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Derrick felt it too, the shift in the air. The presence of the stranger was suffocating. "I know who you are," Elara replied, her voice calm but filled with unspoken fury. "You were the ones who locked me away." The man's visor shifted slightly, as if processing her words. Then, without warning, he raised his hand, and Derrick felt something crackle in the air, a force, invisible but palpable, pressing down on him. His body tensed, but Elara stepped forward, her hands raised, her energy flaring up. The room hummed with a low vibrational pulse, like two forces about to collide. "Elara, don't," Derrick called, but his voice was drowned out by the energy in the air. The stranger's voice was colder now. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. You think you can just walk away? You think you can control this power? We created you. We will own you." Elara's hands glowed brighter, and for a moment, Derrick thought she was about to unleash her full power on them. But instead, she stopped. "You never understood me," she said, her voice still soft, but there was something heavy in her words. "You never saw me as anything but a tool." The man took a step forward, his hand reaching for a weapon. But before he could act, Derrick was already moving, faster than he'd ever thought possible. He tackled the man, sending him crashing to the ground with a force that shook the walls. Kian moved too, taking down the second soldier with a swift punch that left the man sprawled on the floor. The room was chaos, energy crackling in the air, bodies falling to the ground, and Derrick's mind racing with one thought. They weren't going to get out of this without a fight. Elara was standing there, still glowing, watching the fight unfold, but she didn't move. Derrick's eyes met hers for a split second, and he could see it, the fear, the doubt in her eyes. But there was also something else. Strength. The same strength that had saved them both. And then, it happened. With a sudden movement, Elara's hands raised to the ceiling, and the entire room seemed to shudder. The lights flickered, the walls groaned, and Derrick's chest tightened. He could feel it, the power radiating from her, swirling around them. "You've made a mistake," Elara said, her voice now carrying the weight of everything she had been holding back. The room exploded with energy. Derrick ducked as the energy pulsed through the walls, shaking the very foundation of the station. The soldiers were tossed aside like rag dolls, their weapons disintegrating in mid-air. But Elara wasn't done. With one final surge, the entire control room went silent. Derrick gasped for breath, his body aching from the sheer force of the blast. He looked up, his eyes meeting Elara's. Her energy had receded, but there was something different about her now. She wasn't just a survivor. She wasn't just a prisoner. She was free. And it was clear they weren't the ones in control anymore. Kian stood, brushing the dust from his shoulders, his eyes now wary. "That's it then," he said. "You've made your choice, Elara." Elara didn't respond. She simply turned her gaze to Derrick, and for the first time since they had met, there was something softer in her eyes. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice steady. "Ready to fight with me?" Derrick didn't have to think. Always. The control room was eerily still after the chaos had subsided. The station groaned beneath them, its walls battered from the energy Elara had released. Derrick stood just a few steps from her, his eyes on the wreckage around them. The fight had left its mark, but in the end, they had won. At least, for now. Elara's glowing hands slowly dimmed, the pulsing light fading as her energy returned to her core. The warmth that had once surrounded her was now replaced by a calm, almost meditative stillness. She didn't seem shaken, didn't seem tired. It was as if she had done this 1,000 times before. But Derrick could see it in her eyes, a new burden. She had freed herself from the chains they had placed on her, but freedom came with its own set of challenges. Derrick didn't know what the future held, but standing here, in this broken station, he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't going anywhere without her. She looked at him, her teal eyes sharp and calculating. "It's over," she said quietly, but her voice held no triumph. Only a quiet acknowledgement of the battle they just fought. "They'll come again, Derrick. They'll always come." He didn't have an answer. He had no illusions left. The fight wasn't over. But for the first time, he felt like they might stand a chance. "We'll be ready," Derrick said, his voice steady. He knew the odds, but there was something in the way Elara looked at him, something in the way she had protected them both that made him believe they could face whatever came next. A sudden noise behind them made both of them turn. Kian stood at the threshold of the control room, his expression unreadable. He hadn't been part of the fight, but Derrick could feel his presence, heavy and looming. "You did what you had to," Kian said, his voice rough. "But don't mistake this for a victory. There's more at stake than just this station." Derrick eyed him warily. "And what is that supposed to mean?" Kian's gaze shifted to Elara. "It means you're not the only one with power, Elara. You may have control of the station, but the real fight is beyond this. Elara took a step forward, her energy swirling faintly around her. What are you talking about, Kian? Kian sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. There's a larger force at play. A higher order. The people who created you, they're part of something much bigger. They'll stop at nothing to make sure you don't become a threat. Derrick felt his blood run cold. He had known there was something more to Elara's past, something darker. But he hadn't expected this. A bigger organization. A force that would stop at nothing to control her. Elara's eyes narrowed. Then let them come. I won't hide anymore. Kian looked at her, almost with a hint of regret. I'm not asking you to hide. I'm asking you to understand. This isn't just about survival anymore. It's about freedom. Real freedom. For both of you. Derrick glanced at Elara. There was a weight in the air, a decision that hung in the balance. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Elara looked at Derrick, her eyes full of questions and uncertainties. And then, she spoke. I can't keep running from my past, Derrick, she said softly. I have to face it. I have to make sure no one else gets hurt because of what they did to me. Derrick nodded, his heart swelling with something he couldn't quite name. He had always been alone. But now, standing beside Elara, he felt like maybe he wasn't anymore. We'll do it together, he said, his voice firm. Elara's gaze softened, and for the first time since they met, Derrick saw a flicker of warmth in her eyes. Trust. It was small, but it was there. Kian stepped back, giving them space. I can't go with you, he said quietly. But I'll make sure no one else comes after you, not yet. You'll need time. Time to figure this out. Derrick watched Kian for a moment, and then looked back at Elara. We'll find a way. We'll make sure they never get the chance to control you again. Elara nodded slowly, her hand reaching out to Derrick. He took it without hesitation, their fingers intertwining. There was something in the simple act of promise, unspoken but understood. They turned away from the broken control room, walking together into the darkened corridors of the station. The weight of their journey lay heavy on their shoulders, but it was no longer a burden they had to bear alone. For the first time, they didn't feel like strangers. They didn't feel like enemies, or survivors, or even fugitives. They felt like two people, bound by something stronger than survival. They felt like partners. The stars outside the viewport flickered with distant light, a silent witness to their resolve. And beyond the station, a new world waited for them. One they would face together. And now, here we are. After everything, after all the battles, the secrets, the betrayals, and the sacrifices, we've come to realize something crucial. Love doesn't just happen between two humans. It's not bound by our species, our worlds, or our past. It's about what we choose to do when everything falls apart, when nothing makes sense, and when the universe throws us into chaos. Derrick and Elara, they've changed. They've fought their demons, learned to trust each other, and even found something they never expected, something that transcends the stars themselves. But their journey isn't over. In fact, it's just beginning. So, here's the question, are you ready to go on this adventure with them? Ready to face the unknown and discover a love that might just save the entire universe? Because the universe isn't waiting. And neither is their love. What will happen next? You won't believe it. And trust me, this is just the beginning of an even bigger journey. So hit that subscribe button right now, and be one of the first to explore the vastness of love in the stars. Let's make history together. Will you join us?